And on piano, the legendary Nicky Hopkins.
It was this unique marriage of the rawness of the electric guitars and the rhythm section, and then the wider palette of the piano.
Piano has all the colors, can say everything. And a guy who's as talented as Nicky can take a simple song and fill it with all kinds of extra meaning and feeling.
Nicky could do the absolute incredible, you would believe that Otis Spann was in the room, which for a white English kid in the 1960s was absolutely amazing.
You didn't even realize how amazing he was until you would take his contribution out, and then you realize, oh man, that's, you know.
He's adding stuff in there that broadens and deepens the songs, or he's like right out front.
He could entrance you. He could play just about anything.
It was inspiring, he was talented, he was invisible. It's an instinct, it's an art form, being a good session man.
It absolutely blew my mind to see this list of such classic songs that are still being played today. And he performed on those. I start listening for what he's added, and it's like, it's genius, absolute genius.
Over a 30-year period, Nicky Hopkins would play on over 250 albums. In the golden age of rock and roll, bands consisted of guitar and drums until they realized that the piano added harmonic richness and melodic flair. Then, along came the legendary pianist, Nicky Hopkins.
You know the story, it was when I was a little kid and I was tall enough to reach up to play this, well, I didn't know what was up there, it's just this table thing, and all of a sudden these things on the top, which were the keys, right, started making a noise, and I got into it. Mum lifted me up and helped me for about 3 years, and you know, I picked it up.
So by the time you were 6, you were rocking out, huh?
Almost.
Yeah.
He learned classical music to start with. He went to the Royal Academy of Music and then discovered rock and roll when he was in his teens. So he had both these strands, which is what I think one of the things that makes him unique.
And so he could play very melodic, semi-classical parts, but he also could play very beautiful gospel parts, and very good blues playing.
Nicky left the Royal Academy and its emphasis on classical music when he was 16 years old and joined 3 other aspiring musicians. They became the Savages. For Nicky, it was a raw entry into the world of rock and roll, boozy venues, and shady nightclubs.
The 60s, if you were a teenager in the 1960s, you believed you could do anything. It was a land of opportunity then. It was fantastic to be in London in the 1960s.
Well, at 16, yeah. We played local cinemas. Back in those days, they'd have a little group on before the movie, you know?
We had so much great music coming from America, and unfortunately, you couldn't always see these artists, so that led to a great boom in British artists.
The first pro gig I did was with this bizarre character called Screaming Lord Sutch.
Oh, yes, I remember Screaming Lord Sutch.
It was, you know, basic. It was very basic, very cheap. I mean, none of us had any money.
So I used to turn up, and sometimes you had to look for a poster, see where we were playing, and then find the gig.
And then, of course, the whole club circuit developed on pubs. And that's where the young British bands really learned how to play and how to perform to audiences.
All those clubs, you know, from Soho going out all the way down to, you know, Crawdaddy in Richmond or Eel Pie Island in Twickenham or the Ricky Tick in Windsor. They're all in the area where I lived.
One of my favourite places was Eel Pie Island on the Thames, where you had to cross a little bridge and you had to pay twopence to a little old lady. It was a toll.
In November 1961, Nicky joined the legendary Cyril Davis.
Cyril was a blues guy, a phenomenal blues harmonica player who was with Alexis Corner and decided to leave Alexis to form his own band. And I understood why, because Alexis was playing the right material, but very insipidly.
Cyril went off on his own and made his own band, which was called the Cyril Davis All-Stars. And this included, amongst some other great players, Nicky Hopkins, a very young piano player.
Cyril was a very aggressive guy who wanted an authentic Chicago blues band.
Yeah.
And he actually took Satch's band. We had gotten pissed off with Satch for some reason and left Satch about a month before. And then all of a sudden the entire band, except for Satch, was backing Cyril. And we filled out the marquee every Thursday night to capacity and then beyond.
Mick and I were down the club and we went to see Cyril, you know, to see what his new band was like. And the piano player, he just blew us away. There's this little white kid, and he's sounding like he's in the back room of somewhere in Mississippi or Chicago, or he's phenomenal. You know, and that was my first. Mick and I looked at each other and said, whoa, you know, where did Cyril find this guy?
Style, he had a special style, which was this combination of gospel and classical that I never heard anyone else do.
Curiously enough, it was during that period of doing the marquee every week that I met up with the Stones. They were just...
What year now, Nicky, that you met up with the Stones?
That's still at the tail end of '62.
Oh, wow, that early then.
Oh, yeah.
I see.
In fact, they were just starting, and we were just starting. We already had our audience. They didn't, so they were our support band.
Well, I first met him when he was playing with Cyril Davis at the Marquee, because we were opening for Cyril Davis for about 5 shows until we started to get a bit more applause than expected, and then we got fired because he didn't like the competition.
In May 1963, Nicky was rushed into King Edward's Hospital in Park Royal with internal trouble and was put on the critical list. He was later diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which was complicated by losing his gallbladder, his left kidney, and suffering a collapsed lung.
Crohn's disease is something where the guts effectively become very inflamed because the immune system isn't working properly.
And as one young musician will testify, Crohn's is no fun.
It kind of came out of nowhere. I had symptoms for about 3 months of vomiting, diarrhea, loss of weight, fatigue. And then it got to the point where I was rushed to hospital, and then I was quite quickly diagnosed with Crohn's.
But then, certainly, very little was known and understood, and how to treat it even less.
Trying to navigate your way through normal life, as well as being a musician as well, which is, you know, rock and roll and Crohn's don't go hand in hand.
Nicky's unexpected hospitalization was to be the start of an illness that plagued him all his life.
The way I ran into or found out about Nicky is there was my go-to drummer at the time was Bobby Graham, who was one of the great drummers in England. And he told me that he saw this kid named Nicky Hopkins playing piano, and he was terrific, and I should check him out. So I did, and he was absolutely correct.
Cyril Davis came in one Sunday, and he brought this young lad with him who looked terribly ill, I must say. The one thing I remember...
He was so thin.
He was incredibly thin anyway, but he turned up in clothes he'd obviously been wearing before he'd been in hospital. Apparently he was playing the piano, so I mic'd the piano up. And he started playing. I'd never heard anything close to it.
I know.
So when the session finished, I went up to him and I said, well, give me your number, you know, I'm sure I can get you lots of work and da-da-da. And he said, well, I'm not available at the moment because I'm still not recovered from these operations I've had. So I said, well, here's my number. You ring me when you're feeling up to it, and I know I can get you lots of work. Which he did, and I did.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Lynn, who was a producer and engineer, recognised instantly that this guy was going to be an important session player because he covered so much so many basses.
And that's where Nicky Hopkins could come in and, as a kind of classically trained pianist who also miraculously could play in so many different styles, whether it was boogie woogie, the blues, rock and roll, he could do it all.
Ray wrote a poignant kind of bit of a dig but respectful song called Session Man. Nicky plays this incredible Bach-esque type intro on the harpsichord.
And I first saw Nicky's name playing harpsichord, I think, on a Kinks record. And, you know, from day one, he was a guy that you would know, that's him, and you'd pay attention because he always brought something beautiful out of the song.
At Pie Studios, they had a harpsichord for orchestras, and we used to double with it. And it so happened Nicky knew how to play the thing. So it became integrated because it was there, and Ray liked the sounds, and I loved the sounds.
Because the bands wanted keyboards on their records, but actually, in most cases, they were known as guitar bands.
It was simple, basic, and what we wanted, sexually driven kind of aggression. Nicky had the ability to meld things together without getting in the way. Of course, he was technically brilliant anyway.
These are people who, you know, worked every day. This was their job, is to make great music and to make good music better. And I think Nicky was a prime member of that fraternity.
And I think he worked very well with Ray and extended Ray's vision of what to play on the piece.
If you took Nicky away, it was like the magic disappeared. You don't know what the magic is, but something was missing if you took his performance away from the recording.
So if we look back at some of those early Who records, we can see like evidence of Nicky's musicality.
I had no idea what he was going to do or how he was going to do it or what Sheltame expected of him, how he was going to fit in. But of course I did know who he was. He'd played on Country Line Special and really not get a sense of where this incredible blues, high-speed blues piano came from.
He would just be in the background and Pete would say, okay, we need some piano, we need this. And Nicky would just get up and play. So there's no clash of egos going on. And the Who had massive clashes of egos in that band. Not bad, but that's part. That was why I think Nicky probably fitted in.
Later, on Who's Next and Who by Numbers, Nicky's contributions were very different. They were very creative. He was much more rounded, much more straightforward to work with. He didn't fall back into just doing his party pieces. He was really quite brilliant.
And what he's doing is he's sort of, he's adding tension, because most blues songs are kind of like that, medium tempo, but then he'd sort of double it up, you know, so instead of playing same rhythm as the guitars, which could be, you know, I think he might do. And especially on numbers like the Ox, which is an instrumental by The Who. And just in the background you can hear this frantic piano going in.
Again, about halfway through the tune, there's a piano break, and it's very clearly this kind of thing. Which, you know, he runs this riff throughout the whole tune with, you know, a few little variations as well. And, you know, this sounds very much like a jam, and they sort of merge into a 12-bar. Nicky's there with these crazy... you know, interspersing it with the original riff.
In 1967, I was doing Cat Stevens' first album, Matthew and Son. And Nicky turned up and did the album along with the other musicians. And Nicky was fantastic. There's one track on the Cat Stevens album, Matthew Unsung, called Granny. And he just played a great piano on that. It's piano heavy. He did a fantastic job. Nicky added to the mix. I mean, in other words, he wasn't just an ancillary. I mean, what you have with most session musicians, they come in, they do their job for 3 hours, they disappear. Nicky wasn't like that. Nicky did want to do it again if he felt he could make it better. P.P. Arnold, Pat Arnold, was one of the Ikettes, Ike and Tina Turner's backing group, 3 girl singers. And I had a phone call from Andrew Loog Oldham, who was the Stones manager. And he said, I've signed this girl from the Ikettes, so we're going to call her P.P. Arnold.
We were brainstorming what material I would record for the first album. I was called the First Lady of Immediate Records. So Mike Hurst, who also produced Cat Stevens, brought this great song to the meeting, which was The First Cut is the Deepest.
If people ask me what I'm proudest of, probably there are 2 records. One's a Cat Stevens track, I Love My Dog, strangely enough, the first one. The other one is The First Cut is the Deepest.
When I came into the studio and I met Nicky, he was this really lovely, sweet guy. You know, very quiet, very calming. So I felt really this calming effect from him that helped me to relax because I was kind of shy and introverted as well. So, and then that is until he started playing the piano, you know, and I realized this guy is there, this beautiful, sweet guy, no ego coming off of him, and he's like the real deal, you know.
Was it serendipity that their paths crossed in those early days at the Marquee Club? Who knows? For Nicky, the Rolling Stones would become a big part of his life.
When Nicky came into the Rolling Stones scene, and all of a sudden, this guitar band had this whole other color to it, or a bunch of colors.
We were coming up with songs that are absolutely beyond Stu's, let alone capabilities, dreams. He didn't want to know. So I think that Stu said, the only guy that can handle this is Nicky Hopkins.
She's a Rainbow, absolutely classic Stones song with some beautiful piano from Nicky on it. This great introduction, which really sets up the song. And again, you know, hugely identifying part of the song. So the intro's got this very elegantly, beautifully played piano.
She was quite happy not to be playing what Nicky was.
Yeah,
on
but
the songs
Stu always said, you know, if you ever did in major and minor, you went to minor chords. He said, I don't play any of those Chinese shit.
And I remember hearing that piano, and it was this haunting intro, and then it was anticipated, and it kind of like didn't follow a click. It was just like this free-form thing, and it got my attention as a musician early on.
He had an intuitive feeling of where the piano should sit and where it should be, because you're playing with 2 other stringed instruments, and in a way you're a bridge, you know, it's between the rest of the band being on piano. I don't think Nicky knew how, you know, good he was, or just, you know, his instinct for the right note at the right place.
So how could I not do justice by mentioning Sympathy for the Devil and Nicky's contribution to that. Very simple on the intro, block chords, but he does one very cool thing. So you got, allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man right here. Just does that little lift to bring it back to the tonic of the chorus. So please allow me. Does that as you go through the song, and then get to the end, and he's doing this great figure using a 7 chord like this.
Nicky's just playing this piano part that sits nicely with the band, doesn't stick out too much, but you know he's there. So we've got this.
But whenever you sort of started on a track and sort of just put some basics on, suddenly Nicky had just come out with a riff or a melody line or something, which completely changed the song.
I felt this thing between Nicky and me, because I'm churning out songs, you know, and you know, they're only half written, half made, and yeah, we're boiling it in the studio kind of thing, cooking it up. And the way that Nicky would cotton on to what I was just sort of barely laying down, Nicky and I would look at each other and go, because it was the other part that was in my head, but I couldn't put my finger on.
Just always adding that textural thing and then sort of popping out of the texture when called upon.
The way that Nicky plays that and swings it and voices it and chooses to play these chords here, and his just incredible rhythm, yeah, that's what drives the track to me. That and Keith's bass playing on that is stunning.
And somehow, nearly with every other song, Nicky would find that part. And so we all had this sort of strange partnership between ourselves, you know, because I would count on him sometimes and say, I've got half a song here, Nicky. And, yeah, find me the other part, you know, yeah. And every time he'd come up with it, an incredible player.
No, he was stunning player.
I think it's particularly underlined in the period of time with the Rolling Stones, where he was featured pretty much, when Mick Taylor was in the band.
Yeah.
Those albums, which you'll quote.
Beggars Banquet, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, Let It Bleed.
Yeah.
All those 4 were stunning albums.
One of my favorite Stones songs, Monkey Man, I played that till the cows come home.
His introduction on that song, it's like it's like a great movie scene. The first shot you see is like, you go, wow, this is going to be great.
Just very distinctive chords. You know, Nicky plays them great, and I'm sure he came up with that arpeggio idea rather than just, you know, he could have played them as chords, or even down here. But he chose to play them like that, and it adds an instant atmosphere to the song.
It's so iconic what he's doing there. You know, you think of iconic guitar riffs. Well, he was the master and the creator of a lot of iconic piano riffs. And outside blues piano, you can't think of a lot of other people whose riffs just hang in your mind the way Nicky's do.
In total, Nicky would contribute to 14 Rolling Stones albums.
I remember listening to Revolution from the Beatles as a kid, and I just remember hearing that crazy, electric piano solo and what he did at the end of the song. And I thought that was really cool because, understanding that the Beatles were a quartet with 2 guitars, bass, and a drum, they didn't have a keyboardist, so it's like, well, who is that?
And what do you do when the Beatles call you in to play on something? I mean, Nicky walked in and played this solo, which is an absolutely killing solo. It's got some really cool ideas in it. It goes something like this. Again, it's an absolutely rollicking solo, and it's got these kind of cool ideas. Just kind of a Nicky Hopkins trademark in the sense that he's got that kind of movement, that voicing that is changing. It's not just, he's actually got some inner voice movement in there.
The remarkable thing about playing on a Beatles album was that it gave Nicky his first grand slam. It meant that he'd now recorded with the Kinks, the Who, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles.
Nicky was not the star, he was the sideman. His job was to make the records better, not to go, look at me. And I think that as in that role, he was much more purely and essentially a musician.
I couldn't employ him full time, and he was too good to sit around and do nothing. So I knew all those guys, and I said, you know, I've got a great piano player for you. You got to check him out. And of course, all of them wound up using him.
Everybody would always talk about Nicky Hopkins this, Nicky Hopkins that. And suddenly I became very aware that he was playing on everything.
Nicky had 3 years of session work in London where he played with absolutely everybody.
Each record album we did, and then it was done, and then it was, oh, well, what's the next one going to be like? And we'd get on and do the next one. It was never with any viewpoint of having made a record that people were going to listen to 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years into the future.
I think most people that work with Nicky, they get him to come and do one song, and then they suddenly realize, oh, he'd be great on that other song. He said to me, when he was working with Eric, he said he'd go over and Eric would say, oh, that was wonderful. So look, let me show you this one. And Eric Clapton, I mean, yeah.
He was one of the busiest and most successful session players, and then decided he would go back on the road and joined the Jeff Beck Group.
The Jeff Beck Group didn't ease Nicky's workload, but it took him to America, a country that was to have a big impact on him. The Truth album would introduce the talents of Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood.
And man, Nicky's feel and the notes that pour out of his soul and land underneath Rod Stewart's vocal and Jeff Beck's guitar are absolutely perfect for such a badass rock track.
He would use different styles that were more heavy-handed. He could enter into which is rock and roll.
Well, now here was Nicky with that classical training, being very soulful, bluesy, innovative, and improvising, but with the precision of a classical player.
He had this, how would you say, cachet. He had this cachet of information that he could cross-reference. He could put classical Beethoven or whatever instances you would use.
The way Nicky played, there was a soulful precision. So even when he was improvising and going crazy, it was always really kind of in place, but very soulful.
Michael Chechik was doing a radio documentary, and part of it was recording an interview with Glenn Johns. And that took a couple hours, actually. And Glenn and I started talking about recording sound, and he invited me over to Wally Heider Recording, where he was doing sessions with Steve Miller.
I took him to San Francisco to do a Steve Miller album, which he was brilliant on.
I was a sound engineer myself, and I was picking up tips from Glenn as I watched him for the duration of recording the Steve Miller album, Your Saving Grace.
And he stayed, and I think he got hit on by Quicksilver Messenger Service, and he played with them.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
I was blown away by his keyboard playing. I saw that he was above and beyond just about anybody I'd ever heard.
After working a long day, we were listening to an old Steve Miller Band album, and we were listening to Your Saving Grace, which has a song on it, Baby's House, which Steve Miller had Nicky Hopkins on piano and organ, and it's my favorite performance of Nicky's.
People were desperate to try and follow in the footsteps of Sgt. Pepper, really, I suppose. That's what started it all. And of course, an album by then could sell in millions. That's why it's so important to spend a lot of time in the studios with the best musicians available to produce the finest album you could do.
Nicky was still playing with the Jeff Beck Group, but internal friction within the band had reached breaking point with the departure of Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart.
So he stayed in Mill Valley, north of San Francisco, immediately, having now played with the Stones on famous records and the Beatles, he immediately was embraced as rock royalty.
You know, the San Francisco bands were basically, it was kind of like Motown. I mean, they were a family.
Now, all the San Francisco bands at this time were recording at Wally Heider's studio, which was still moderately new down on Post Street. And people were just hanging out all the time.
Usually if somebody came to town, like Nicky did for Steve Miller, he would get with this family and was meeting members of the Dead and members of Quicksilver and the Airplane. And he ended up just, I think he fell in love with the town and decided to stay for a while.
Now, I wish that I could say who it was that got Nicky involved in this, but whoever it was, good thinking, because he did some incredible playing on that record.
Nicky's left hand would just solidify. It was like putting pinpoints of foundations around a building. As he'd fill in other harmonic aspects to it, it wasn't a left hand playing rhythm and a right hand doing melody. He would work truly like a concert pianist, like a classical musician, and with all of his training. The rest of us would just fall right in line. Before, as we'd work on the songs, Nicky come in and put that, just the solidness into the track.
He should have played at Woodstock with the Jeff Beck group, but Jeff Beck sulked and went home. But Nicky still played at Woodstock because he was on stage with the Jefferson Airplane.
Woodstock, at the beginning of the tour, was just another gig we had. We had to be somewhere else a couple of days later.
I don't think anybody had an idea what was going to happen whatsoever. And I remember that when the Airplane, everybody's got their own story about this, but we went on about 18 hours late. If we were to do a festival like that today, it would be, I hope I never work this gig again as long as I live. I mean, for a lot of reasons.
Even though the world was really in a really bad state, really. Like we were going through the Vietnam War, civil rights, but the youth were bringing it all together. We were trying to change things. So it was a time of change for humanity.
I will never play for a crowd as big as this as long as I live. And when we actually see that, it defies description.
Woodstock would later be regarded as a pivotal moment in popular music history, and the Volunteers song played at Woodstock by Jefferson Airplane has been described as one of the great anti-war protest songs of the 60s. Nicky had by this time met up with John Cipollina, founder member of Quicksilver Messenger Service.
John and David Freiberg from Quicksilver came up to see me, and they said that they were short one guy because Gary Duncan had left, and it was just those two and Greg Elmore, so they needed a fourth for the album. I said, would I stay on?
Like many of the San Francisco groups, the Quicksilver Messenger Service with John Cipollina was a little bit more freewheeling than groups in the UK. They went off on tangents sometimes, and Nicky, being an improvisational piano player, loved that. He loved doing things off the cuff.
John and Nicky realized very soon that they had very much in common.
And ended up staying at his house, and they became extremely close.
Nicky recorded Shady Grove with Quicksilver when Quicksilver had kind of changed slightly.
More than anything, I just enjoyed having John as a friend more than anything.
Nicky hadn't just found a friend, he was welcomed and truly embraced by John Cipollina's wider family.
They loved him because it was a musical family. John's mother, Evelyn, had been a concert pianist. She was a protege of Jose Iturbi, and she was a piano teacher for decades. And like minds attracted. And Nicky could go up there and just sit and play piano, and he fit right in with what was a totally musical family. He was one of the family. I know John knew Terry from before, and at some point, when Quicksilver was kind of winding down, John and Terry started doing things together, and by that time, Nicky was, like I said, one of the family.
I remember Nicky inviting me down to play bass on a track called Rainbow he was producing in San Francisco for a Terry Dolan album for Warner Brothers. Nicky produced side one of the project, but he had to go off on a long Stones tour, so they asked me, Terry and Nicky asked me to produce side two.
I like working with Terry. I found that to be a real fun gig to do, and we actually did quite a few gigs. I'd just fly up there for the weekend, do a gig with Terry, and come back again. We used to do that umpteen times.
And with Terry and the Pirates, well, they were together so long. Nicky played many, many sessions through the years with Terry, and Terry had many, many musicians.
Often described as a Marin County's boy club of professional players, led by Terry Dolan, Terry and the Pirates have become a kind of revolving door for musicians who were between jobs.
Then we did the gig in Hamburg, which was a television show, and then slept about 6 hours, and then the next morning came back to the States. I couldn't believe it. It's like we were in Europe for about 3 days and did 3 gigs. In 3 different cities, hundreds of miles apart. It was nuts.
But I know that Nicky enjoyed playing with both Quicksilver and Terry Dolan, and there were a couple other groups that he played with in San Francisco that were essentially anchors for him to give him reason to stay in his home in Mill Valley.
It was great to come to somewhere like the Bay Area and find some people who weren't into all this self-important crap. One could just be oneself. I thought it was great. Kindred spirits and all that.
Jerry Garcia was best known as guitarist with the Grateful Dead, who were part of the counterculture of the 1960s.
Nicky was a rock and roll player. And I mean, aside from everything else he could do, he could play rock and roll piano like nobody else. I mean, I think his major god was Jerry Lee Lewis more than Chopin. And he brought that rock and roll sensibility, which Jerry loved. And it was something different. You know, Jerry was always looking for something different, whether it was his bluegrass band or his Jerry Garcia band or the Saunders Garcia band, and he was just looking for something different, and Nicky was there.
In 1976, when Starsky and Hutch was a huge television hit, David Soul recorded an album entitled David Soul.
I don't know David Soul. I know what he did with Starsky and Hutch, and I know that David Soul did his own solo album, which actually was pretty popular, and Nicky played on that.
Nicky Hopkins playing on David Soul's album. So this is something I didn't know about. This is a revelation, and I find the thought incredibly entertaining. You know, it's so funny that a guy who would be like a famous actor, well, I want to be a rock star. Or whatever, you know.
David Soul wanted to have more exposure, and music was one way to do it. He was a guitar player, from what I understand, and he had a good voice, and he wanted to use it.
I don't know that he and David Soul had any kind of relationship. I don't know if Nicky had any relationship with David Soul's producer or where that came from, but he was just the gold star session piano player.
Tell me, how do you sleep at night? Hit it. Jump when your mama tell you anything.
So it was really the Beatles and quickly the Stones that had melody with the soul of the old blues guys that was like an explosion and a revelation, an emotional revelation. It was like a possession. And I fell in love with rock and roll through the Beatles and Stones.
The other side of Nicky was that he could be quite delicate as well. I mean, if I wasn't involved in the Lennon stuff, but I imagine if you listen to what he's actually playing, it's very delicate. You just have to pick it out.
Nicky had crossed paths with John Lennon a few times over the years. It came as no surprise to Nicky when John invited him to be a part of the sessions for his Imagine album.
Looking around, you know, I saw Klaus. I already knew, obviously, who he was, and so I was very, it just added to the otherworldly feeling that I had being there in John Lennon's little studio with John and Phil.
Well, the track I think that Nicky liked the most was Jealous Guy.
You couldn't go wrong, you know, it was John and his song, and he's singing, and he loved the song, obviously, and it was about, you know, one of the people he loves most in the world, and, you know, and the whole thing was set up to just move you. The listener, people who have heard that song over the years, you know, they hear it and they feel that wonderful little kind of vibe. And Nicky Hopkins, to me, was a huge part of that. Nicky's sound on the piano was like that of an English garden, to me.
So, for example, in Nicky's music, I would say something like Jealous Guy and Angie would be good examples of where he will repeat little patterns, and it's quite subliminal, I think, for the listener.
I could feel John responding to our playing, and I love that. I've always loved that. When you're in the studio and you're making a record, you can't help but feel everybody's vibe.
Nicky had such respect for John and his abilities, you know, and I know that he enjoyed working on the Imagine album.
There's been a lot of speculation that John played the piano on Imagine and not Nicky. Moira Hopkins sees it as making perfect sense.
You know, that was such a big song that John should be playing the piano for that particular song, because it was like the name of the album as well, wasn't it? It was very important.
So I'm on piano on most of the rest of that album, which was great. And of course, John was such a unique character. I found that John was very into him just being himself anyway and getting things done. John was brilliant because he could get things done very quickly, which was why, because I asked him once why he moved to New York. And he said, because it's the only place that can keep up with him. I thought, yeah, okay, well, that makes sense.
Nicky was well liked by all of the ex-Beatles, and Paul McCartney was no exception.
So I used to drive him places, you know, and he said, Paul wants me to go down to Winchelsea. He wants me to come down to the studio. So I drove him down and, you know, went in with him. And when Paul saw that Nicky had arrived, he came up and hugged him. And over his shoulder, he said to me, oh, he said, it's been so long since I've seen him. And he was so very happy to see him, you know.
Despite Paul McCartney's admiration for him, Nicky was asked to audition for Paul's Wings. He'd known Paul for over 20 years. He didn't join Wings.
I actually have no proof of it, but I think that because, you know, Linda was playing, that maybe she didn't feel so comfortable with Nicky being there on the, you know, on piano.
In 1989, Paul invited Nicky to play on his album Flowers in the Dirt. Almost 18 years on from playing on the Imagine album in 1971, Nicky achieved his second Grand Slam. He'd now played on the solo albums of all four Beatles.
First of all, the thing you want to do if you're a person that plays on records, the thing you pray for is that it's a great song to be able to play on.
Different from the production of his previous albums, George Harrison carefully chose a small core of musicians to support him. He included Nicky Hopkins.
But George, when I heard that little song, Give Me Love, it just did the same thing, only in a little bit of a different way than John's Jealous Guy did. You just knew exactly what to play. And with Nicky playing those chords the way he would play those chords, and with the touch that he played them, it wasn't anything you could do wrong. You couldn't go wrong.
He had this invaluable ability to realize where to start playing in the song. You don't have to play from the top, and where to play in relation to the melody, and just what can break your heart with a few notes up high.
You know, those guys had him on their records for that reason, because he could elevate a song to a place that it might not have gotten to.
Nicky would come up with these little vignettes that were so memorable. You know, you would hear it and you'd say, wow, that makes that song.
That creativity, that ability to come up with vignettes effortlessly added to and made songs better. Something another ex-Beatle understood.
I'm choosing Photograph from Ringo Starr because...
Really?
Yes. Because, no, it's a beautiful song. It's certainly one of the more obscure ones.
Nice, simple pop song. The essence of that song, again, you'd have to point to Nicky. I would have to, anyway. The arrangement was great overall, everything about it, all the playing and everything. But Nicky's touch, you know, it's just another example of having Nicky Hopkins and a Beatle together, and I'm in the room with them. That's just a great, it doesn't get any better than that for me, personally.
So I have two favorite Nicky Hopkins tracks. The first one is called Dreamer, off the album The Tin Man Was a Dreamer. And man, his piano playing and the way he's playing feels next to the orchestra is absolutely exquisite.
Nicky was working with George Harrison during the week, and at weekends, he recorded his own solo album, The Tin Man Was a Dreamer, helped, of course, by some of his mates, including George.
Every piano player that I've known since those days, and I've talked about Nicky, they all bow. You know, he just was one of those unusual beauties that comes around once in a while.
I didn't know it at the time. Well, why was he called the Tin Man? He collected tea tins, English tea tins, you know, because some of the artwork on these things, especially when you, was pretty incredible.
Also on The Tin Man Was a Dreamer is this version of his song Edward, the Mad Shirt Grinder.
The 70s were his most successful period in his life. He was commuting across the Atlantic to play with the Stones and with John Lennon, and countless sessions in Los Angeles.
Nicky had returned to London to be part of the Rolling Stones' latest album, Let It Bleed. Bill Wyman picks up the story.
Yeah, we all arrived at the studio and Ray Cuda came and hung out. And Keith didn't like that, so Keith went home, I think. And it was just us, wasn't it? And we didn't know what to do, so Nicky just started jamming. Then we just sort of jammed and fooled around, didn't we? And Mick just threw in bits and pieces, and
it was completely spontaneous.
And it was just
I
a
realised that something unusual could happen, so I started running the tape.
But it's a very stoned thought was the title. I had become Edward on some stone sessions because Keith, it was at Olympic, which was a huge area, huge floor area. Keith was tuning his guitars up and he was yelling at me because the headphones weren't working, and so it was hard to hear. And he said, "Nicky, give me an E." I said, "What?" He said, "Give me an E." I said, "Can't hear you. Give me an E for Edward." So I became Edward.
The first time I met Nicky Hopkins, I believe, was on the sessions for Harry Nilsson for the Son of Schmilsson record.
Son of Schmilsson was an eclectic mixture of styles. It accentuated Nilsson's reputation for producing anarchic and eccentric work.
That's a good way to describe Harry Nilsson. He was an anarchist to some degree, but you know, "You're Breaking My Heart," that's typical Harry Nilsson. Fun and speaking his mind, and you know, little dirty words here once in a while. It's not really a dirty word anymore, is it?
I mean, Nilsson is not only a great singer and composer, but he's an excellent pianist. And he played on several tracks by Nilsson. I think it was probably during that time in LA when there was a lot of partying going on, like the Hollywood Vampires and John Lennon and Keith Moon going a bit nuts in the studio. And I imagine Nicky was part of that party. And maybe that night Nilsson was too drunk, so he said, "Well, you play the piano."
Harry Nilsson thoroughly enjoyed and appreciated what Nicky brought to the recording sessions. The end result? Nicky played on 9 out of the 11 tracks.
He was a white man from Sheffield, England, right? But he sounded like a black man that had maybe been born in Mississippi. And he was just extraordinary, Joe. Just incredible.
Nicky's friendship with Joe Cocker was from the outset unlikely. The wild party man from Sheffield and the quiet, retiring piano player.
It's not so much Nicky Hopkins' intro to You Are So Beautiful, which is genius, but it's his touch in general. His sense of melody, but I didn't even think his fingers were moving. He had such a beautiful touch. There's You Are So Beautiful, and there's Bridge Over Troubled Water, Larry Knechtel on piano. And I put them on the same level.
It's a song that Nicky was particularly proud of, and you can see why. It's a beautiful piano part. It has different textures in, he varies which register he's in to bring different weight into different sections. And it really sort of shows the kind of sensitivity and vulnerability of the lyrics.
But Nicky's playing on You Are So Beautiful is just, I mean, I get goosebumps when I listen to it every time. You know, to this day, it's one of the most beautiful backing tracks for any person. And of course, it was Joe Cocker.
In 1976, Joe, who'd been struggling with debts, agreed on a tour of New Zealand, Australia, and South America.
They got along really well. I think when Joe decided to go back out on the road again, he wanted Nicky and Bobby Keys with him. And they had all sorts of adventures. This was before Nicky actually went to rehab.
There's a track on the Airwaves album called The Dreamer, and that's probably the outstanding piano track. At one point, the song reverts back to the intro, which is just acoustic guitar and little sprinkles of piano on, and then me playing guitar with the volume knob. I listen to it to this day, and it's just tears.
Badfinger originated from the UK, but had morphed into a West Coast band. Joe tells us about recording their album, Airwaves.
So we discussed Nicky, and Joe and Tom had run into him at Abbey Road or working with the Beatles a few times, and the name came up. And me, I went twist my arm, you know. It was a dream come true having him play piano. I don't know what it is about English guys. They don't drive. None of them drove at the time. They were like, we don't drive. We get driven around. Okay. Go pick Nicky up. He's living in Canoga Park. I get the address and bring him to rehearsal. Showed up at the front door and knock on the door. Guy standing there in his underwear. He's got messing around with his eyes and his hair's all messed up. And it's Joe Cocker opening the front door. And he looked like John Belushi imitating Joe Cocker. Apparently they'd been up having too much fun the night before, and they were sharing a place together at the time. That was the first time I'd ever met Nicky.
I tell you what impressed me about Nicky the most was after working with the Rumour, who it was a bit painstaking getting them to learn my songs, and they generally deconstructed them and tried to do something else with them before coming back to the song. But Nicky, he'd listen to the song once and play through with a take. We'd do a take with Nicky playing. He'd play through it once, and that was all. I didn't have to tell him anything after that. He'd learnt it.
Well, bands couldn't live in the studios forever. They were expected to go out and entertain all the people that bought their albums, and it was the biggest money spinner, really, was to go on a major epic tour of Europe or America or even to Japan.
Graham Parker and the Rumour had a big following in Germany. When they were invited to play one of the Rock Palace concerts, Nicky decided to accompany his friend. For Nicky, whose health was fragile at the best of times, the Rolling Stones' 50-show schedule was grueling to the point that it had become a dangerous factor.
There was a lot of downtime doing nothing, you know, to be honest. They had their bit on stage, which was fantastic. For that 2 hours, it was fantastic. And they wanted to carry that on, really, afterwards.
Crohn's can be very challenging, especially when you're on a long tour and you're not eating well.
He physically wasn't very well, but you know, he had a lot of problems all through his life with his health. And so he was ill a lot.
So when I first came into the position with the Stones and Stu and I became good friends, I asked him, I said, Stu, look, I'm real happy to be here, don't get me wrong, but where's Nicky? Why isn't Nicky Hopkins here? And they said, with Nicky, bless his heart, he always had health problems. And so the band was scared they'd be on tour and that, you know, a major date coming up and he'd have some kind of attack and couldn't make the show.
Like many of us back in the day, Nicky did have a bit of a drinking problem, I guess. Mostly a problem because of his ill health and frail constitution.
I know that Nicky took drugs. He was in pain, and he took the drugs for his pain. I doubt that he was an addict in classical sense. The medical profession defines an addict as someone who has a disruption in their psychosocial functioning, and Nicky had none of those.
With me, however, it grew so out of control. I mean, I was doing pretty much every drug, every existing drug to the max and then beyond.
He had a 10-year bout, more or less, with drugs and alcohol. He was the wrong person to be living that lifestyle. He wasn't strong enough for it. And he got, it took him to a very, very bad place eventually.
I mean, he would talk to me about it. You know, he would talk to me about the stupid things that he did, and you know, and of course he'd suffered physically for a number of years with, I think it was Crohn's disease. So I think the combination of Crohn's disease and the other excesses of being on the road at that particular period weren't helpful to him.
I was working with Chick Corea, and I got a call from Artist Relations at Moog, a friend of mine, Robbie Konikoff, and he said, Rory, I have a favor of you. And I said, what's that? He goes, do you know Nicky Hopkins? And I went, yeah, of course I do. And I lit up because I was like, where's this going? I get to meet him, you know? And he said, well, he really wants to meet Chick. Can you set that up? And I said, of course, you know? So I asked Chick, I said, hey, Chick, I know we're rehearsing, but Nicky Hopkins is in town and would really like to meet you. Can we make this happen? He goes, absolutely, bring him in. So Chick comes out very cordial and happy, and he's rehearsing, they're going great. Nicky said, Chick, what a pleasure to meet you, and puts his hand out and shakes his hand. He goes, how are you doing? And Chick said, great, man, great. He goes, how are you doing? And it got really quiet. And Nicky looks at Chick and said, not so good. Chick goes, well, what's wrong? He goes, doctor told me I have 2 weeks to live unless I quit heroin. And Chick said, I'm going to get you into rehab. And Chick called a few phone numbers, got him into rehab, and that probably saved his life at that moment.
I went in pretty negatively. I didn't think it would work. I didn't think anything could work. I thought, well, it's the only thing I know. It's like a last-ditch effort. And much to my surprise, it did work. I mean, which amazed me.
I first met Nicky Hopkins in 1985, and it was for a session when the Stray Cats were taking a break and we all made solo records. And Lee Rocker and myself teamed up with Earl Slick. And like I said, Earl Slick knew Nicky from the past. We were at the point of the record where we needed the piano. Slick called Nicky, Nicky came to Capitol Studios. He had a rock and roll style, but very melodic, and a soft touch without tinkling. He had a great technique and a good pounding of the keys, but in a melodic way. Very unusual combination that's wanted by everybody. So he wound up playing on 3 tracks. There was one track called No Regrets that he played on. There was another track called Lonely Actions that was almost like a ballad, but not quite, a little bit of a rock beat to it. And then he played on one called Time Is On My Hands, which is a straight up blues in appearance, but the chord changes are a little bit different. It's a little not quite as trad blues, and Nicky played beautifully on it.
This tribute was planned, and then, you know, and it was only about 4 weeks after John died that the tribute happened at the Fillmore. I thought, oh, bloody hell, I really should be there.
Nicky heard about John's passing and that tribute, and was actually on tour with Art Garfunkel in Australia, and he got on a plane and made sure he was at the Fillmore to memorialize John's legacy there.
And when John passed away, he'd not only lost a very close friend, he'd lost a kindred spirit. It seemed fitting that Nicky would reunite with Terry and the Pirates to say farewell to John.
There was one song called Don't Touch Me. I had this kind of little modal guitar intro and this cool beat, and it's just a classic Nicky thing, because I play a lick and there's a hole, play a lick and there's a hole, there's about 4 or 5 of those before I start singing. And right off the bat, I play this very kind of classic. This is a bad word. It's not classical, but it was a little demented. It was off the rock path, you know. And instantly, in the hole, Nicky started doing demented answering. And it was just completely natural, like when we were jamming. So Nicky was mostly on piano all the time. And as we went from song to song, Jeffrey and I would arrange the songs and be pretty together with here's the arrangement, here's the chords. So right off the bat, especially with Nicky, when we started recording, he was already, with no real direction from us other than be Nicky Hopkins. He was already orchestrating the music. You know, he would do these octave themes, and just naturally, he would pull back when the singing was happening. When the singing stopped, he'd lean into it. But it was always very thematic and cinematic in a way. And it was just, you know, beautiful, you know, session work, improv by Nicky.
He had a famously difficult girlfriend wife, his first wife, Dolly, who was very ambitious for Nicky to be a rock star and probably prompted him into a solo career, which was not his strength. He wasn't a front man. He was a side man. He was a brilliant, brilliant side man, but not a front man.
I think his wife, Dolly, was handling most of his business at the time. Dolly was a combination wife, lover, babysitter, mother, all of the above.
For about 3 years, everything was fine. They got along fine, and you know, they had you know, fun together. But I think something changed.
He said it was a challenging relationship, really, but he didn't want to disparage her at all. He was very gentlemanly like that, and you know, it was grey, it was faults on both sides.
They grew apart because, well, Nicky had gone to rehab, and I believe Dolly did too, but she didn't stick with it. So, quite honestly, she was still drinking, whereas he had stopped. Now, you know, but that's very difficult. Like, if, you know, you've just gone through rehab and then there's somebody living in the same household, you know, who is drinking every day. It's difficult.
Yeah, when I first met Moira with Nicky, I thought, whoa, he's landed on his feet with this lady. It was instantly the way I'd like to see my friend with somebody like that. It was a very nice thing.
Somebody took me up to meet Nicky, and I was introduced to him, and he shook my hand, and you know, I can't remember what we said, but he was so kind and so nice that I walked away, and I said to my friend, I said, wow, I said, I wish I could marry somebody like Nicky Hopkins. Because he's so nice, you know. He was just a wonderful human being. And it kind of shone through. You know, Nicky liked art, and art liked Nicky, and he loved his work.
Nicky called me, and he said, I'm doing this show with Art Garfunkel on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and we need strings. Will you play the strings for us? I started playing these great orchestral string sounds, and Art was like, what I'm looking for is a snowbird walking on snow. Real thin, simple, boom. I'm watching Nicky play the intro, and he just does this simple, beautiful, wasn't simple. He makes it look simple. This beautiful intro to this song. Art comes in, and even as a musician, you well up, you get the chills, the hair goes up, and you're like, this is magic.
Here I am, alone on the plain. Sun's going down, starting to rain. Papa will go sailing.
When Art played the Albert Hall, And Nicky was, you know, not only playing the piano, he was also his music director. Art took a break, you know, for his voice, like just for about 5 or 10 minutes. And he introduced Nicky as the legendary Nicky Hopkins playing his own composition. And it was a piece that Nicky wrote when he came back to Britain. He was so happy to be home that he wrote this piece of music called The Homecoming. And he played it at the Royal Albert Hall. And that was very nice of Art to allow him to do that.
Nicky Hopkins was the kind of piano player that you needed if you were going to play, you know, with Art Garfunkel. Artie knew that, and to his credit, you know, they made some great music together.
I met Nicky in February 1987 through Gray Levitt, who was representing Nicky at the time. Woody Woodmansey had introduced me to Gray because I'd left Dexys Midnight Runners and I was forging a new career and writing an instrumental album. And when I met Gray, he said, oh, Nicky's doing a similar project, writing instrumental music. So he said, why don't you two get together? And the thought of playing with Nicky was a dream come true, really, I suppose. And that was the start of a musical relationship and our friendship.
He loved being back in England. He'd moved from America, and I came over from America and joined him. And then we got married at Hever Castle.
It was at Hever Castle. The special guest of honour was Art Garfunkel and his wife. It was a great day. It was a sunny day. We had, you know, someone playing the bagpipes dressed up in the Highland attire.
We had to go back to America because he was missing a lot of work. You know, Joe Cocker had been looking for him, wanted to come play on an album, and someone else, I can't think who it was now, but so we wound up, we went back to LA.
You know, we had, I think, met with Nicky when we were looking for people to be in the band. And I think we met with him just to have the thrill of meeting Nicky because I think he was busy at the time. And so we just thought, well, let's have a meeting. We weren't jerking him off or anything. We just wanted to say, we're doing this and you're doing that and how great. But he was working, you know, I think he would have been too good for us, you know, what we were trying to do. We weren't trying to do bad music. But, I mean, Nicky was a virtuoso, and I think we would have had trouble making that funny. And then when Rainy Day Sun came up, we just thought, that's the guy, and we're not asking him to be in something for 28 days. We're asking him to come to a session, and we got it together.
Well, when Nicky did the recording with Spinal Tap, I took him down to the studio, and he was asking Christopher Guest if he didn't model his part in Spinal Tap on Jeff Beck. He said, go on, just tell me. He goes, you were Jeff Beck, weren't you? He wouldn't tell him. He wouldn't admit to it.
You know, part of the thrill of doing that project was either in the making or later getting to meet people that we really just thought the world of, and Nicky was absolutely one of them.
Back in '92, Nicky and I played piano together on a Zero album, Chance in a Million, being recorded live, and at Great American Music Hall in San Francisco. And we just went nuts and started trading licks back and forth in the piano solo.
When I grew up listening to so many different kinds of music that I like a lot of different kinds of music, and I've learned to play them over the years too. I mean, I've become quite involved in many different kinds and different forms of music, so I don't feel that it's necessarily being a dilettante with any particular form of music. I think I've gotten to know many kinds of music quite well or very well.
The spring of 1993 found Nicky in an upbeat mood. Plans had been formed to begin recording with Frankie Miller and Joe Walsh. There were discussions regarding a tour with Harry Nilsson, and he had his own ongoing film projects.
And everything was actually fine for about 2 or 3 years. He didn't complain of any upsets. And then sadly, 93 wasn't a good year because he had a sudden eruption that put him in hospital.
And he was saying that he was going in and out of the hospital. His Crohn's disease was kicking in, and they were just taking more intestine out and doing that and that.
Even today, most people, after say 10 years of having Crohn's disease, has had some form of surgery. But back in Nicky's day, it probably was the main form of treatment in the end because there were so few drugs.
He had to have one organ or another removed. I thought it was his kidney, but maybe it was something else.
Moira received many messages from friends for Nicky's recovery, including an unexpected one from an ex-Beatle.
Paul happened to be in LA when Nicky was ill in hospital, and he made a point of calling up and saying to me, please give all the best to Nicky and tell him, you know, I hope that he gets well soon and that, you know, I'm thinking of him. And that was really wonderful. We were living just up the road from Joe Walsh in Encino in Los Angeles. So Nicky and Joe got together with Terry Reid and they put this band together called The Flu.
Well, that's Joe's idea. What are we going to call it? The Flu. I'm going, oh, God, here we go.
Joe was in negotiations for the reforming of the Eagles, but it didn't stop these three friends having some fun.
When you're doing gigs as a band, you know yourself as playing, you know, when you're playing, you remember those gigs.
That's quite a lineup, Terry.
Oh, it's a hell of a lineup. Oh, no. Oh, the rehearsals. It was the rehearsals.
I'd like to be a fly on the wall.
Oh, God, I felt like we were flies on the wall.
Man.
No, when you're doing rehearsals, you never knew what was going to happen. I mean, with Joe, everything. I don't know. I love Joe, dude. He is the funniest guy I think I've ever met in music.
They had a great concert and he was hoping to do more. And actually, Nicky did do more with Joe and a Scottish singer called Frankie Miller. They recorded about 4 or 5 pieces of music in this little recording studio in Georgia.
1994 began badly for Nicky. The Northridge earthquake occurred in the early hours in the San Fernando Valley region of Los Angeles.
The northern half, which is the posher half, is built on rock, and rock communicates these vibrations very thoroughly. It's a good conductor. So if you lived in the northern half of Santa Monica, your house did like that. And the southern half of Santa Monica is built on sand, which doesn't conduct it nearly as well.
All of a sudden, the entire room started going 4 feet in each direction. The earth was like, for lack of a better word, screaming and moaning, like these giant sounds of like the earth grinding.
It was the strangest earthquake because not only was it like you had to be walking uphill almost, the earth was, I mean, it was moving in chunks, and also it was going from side to side as well.
The whole city's been decimated, power's out everywhere, and days of, you know, reconstruction, if you will, putting your life back together.
We could see fires starting up I mean, it was really scary, and it was like being on board ship. All that night, the aftershocks just kept rolling through.
He had enough. He said, no, that's it. I can't do this anymore. And he picked up and moved to Nashville.
I'm sure that Nicky moving to Nashville was the best thing for him. It definitely was the best thing for me.
There were people in Nashville that were excited that Nicky Hopkins had moved to town.
I think we got there about in March of '94.
Just as they were settling into life in Nashville, Nicky started to feel unwell.
He asked me to take him to a chiropractor because he had lower back pain, and he never had lower back pain. And he said that the chiropractor said, I think that perhaps you might want to make an appointment to see your doctor, because he suspected something was wrong.
2 days later, Nicky and Moira celebrated Labor Day together.
I was feeling tired. I said, I'm going to go up to bed. And he said, well, I'm just going to stay down for a little while, you know. And so I went up to bed, and it was about, I guess I don't know, I'd fallen asleep, but I heard him yell out. And I went running downstairs, and he was in excruciating pain. And I called an ambulance. I got him to the hospital, and they wouldn't give him anything to kill the pain. They said they had to wait for his doctor to arrive, and he took his time. And so it was too late. You know, Nicky couldn't take it. His heart gave out. I just thought I was so lucky, you know, to have the marriage I had. I had a very, very happy marriage, and I shared my life with a wonderful, wonderful person, you know.
Long ago.
Being, you know, a young guy at the top of his game, also battling this, you know, chronic illness that no one knows anything about. And it's an invisible illness that people don't really understand. And I think that is, you know, it's kind of heartbreaking that, you know, he probably should be still alive right now.
It's important to remember people who made music popular and long-lived with their prowess on an instrument that really does take some work and some major talent to master, and he certainly was a master of it.
I think everyone remembers him really fondly and always have, and you know, I miss Nicky a lot.
I can't really explain just how brilliant he was.
But the reason why we're sitting here today is because he was an astonishing musician, the like of which I've never come across.
And if you were musically inclined and there was a piano around, he could entrance you.
We became friends so easily. It's hard not to be a friend of Nicky's.
Nicky was a pure musician, and his contributions are purely musical, and I think that deserves remembering.
I was talking to him about his playing and how detailed it was and how precision he was, and he says, well, I'm Chopin. And I said, what? He said, yes, I'm a reincarnation of Frederick Chopin. And I said, okay. And he did more than believe that he was Frederick Chopin. He knew that he was so positive about that fact that I just had to believe him.
Nicky did believe that he was Chopin in another life. And he used to play, he listened to a lot of Chopin, and he used to, play on the keyboards and piano. If there was a piano around, he'd play Chopin.
And I think that could very well be the case, because he was just that talent on that high spiritual, classical level.
I think he was.
Reincarnation is to do with human beings, so it's quite possible what Nicky said is true. But I would have thought that if he was Chopin in his last lifetime, he'd be a bit sick of playing the piano. I think he'd probably try and be doing something else. You know what I mean?
Nicky's musical career spanned just over 30 years, and during that time, he played with some of the greatest bands in the world. His contributions on their records made him rock and roll's greatest session man.